What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. A day in the life of a medieval executioner in their 16th century heyday. It wasn't easy to live as a medieval executioner. They did more than simply chop off heads and break prisoners on the wheel. Trying to uphold justice and set an example for their community was only one part of an executioner's duties. They also served as medical professionals and sometimes as spiritual guides, helping the condemned accept their fate and beg forgiveness before God. Occasionally, other villagers ostracized executioners for having a grim job. And yet, as they say, it's a job and somebody has to do it. But what was it like for these people to wake up in the morning and begin a day possibly fraught with hate, boredom, or extreme danger? What devices for executions did they use back in the Middle Ages? And what about the psychology of an executioner? Fortunately, the full story of Master Franz Schmidt, a Nuremberg executioner in the 16th century, has been recorded in history. The following account comes from Schmidt's diaries, and gives a strange and rare glimpse into the daily life and practices of a medieval executioner. Some days there might be multiple executions, but today there is just one. The stereotypical image of a 16th century executioner is of a burly, bare-chested fellow in a black hood, wielding a massive axe. This mask may send shivers down the spines of kids today, but the town executioner was likely proud of his well-paying job. For other executioners across Europe, sometimes they had several victims to deal with in the same day. If you lived in the time of Henry VIII, you hardly had time for a break. There are estimates of as many as 72,000 executions during Henry's reign. You would have had your day cut out for you, so to speak. But this time your task is different. Today, on August 13, 1577, you have but one execution before you. You will not behead bands of pirates or break the bones of your victims on the wheel. Your charge is a man named Hans Vogel, and your duty: send this repentant sinner off to the promise of salvation. Executioners often inherited their job. You recently arrived in Nuremberg from Bamberg, your birthplace. This will be your first execution in your new home. Vogel's crime was burning an enemy to death in a stable, and for this you must do your job. You think back to how you came to your profession, like father like son, they say. But your father's profession was more by default than by design. Albrecht too, a vicious Bavarian magistrate, wanted to hang 3 men. Without an executioner at hand, he picked your father Heinrich out from the crowd and forced him to perform the execution or face a hanging himself. What's a father to do? Once your father did it, however, nobody wanted to have anything to do with him. As was the tradition for the son of an executioner, you took up the same occupation. You were 18 when you became executioner under your father's supervision in 1573, and since then, you have performed 361 executions and 345 minor punishments, floggings, as well as ear or finger amputations. You've executed criminals by rope, sword, the breaking wheel, burning and drowning. And yet, despite the dishonorable nature of his profession according to others, anyway your endearing name, Meister Franz. You're a respected member of the community for your piety. But let us return to Vogel and August 1577. Executioners and prisoners often became acquainted. As is customary with prisoners, you've gotten to know Vogel after all. You are personally sending him off to eternity. If he had serious wounds or were otherwise ill, you would have nursed him back to health, fulfilling the duties of your secondary profession as a medical consultant. You might have also requested the execution's delay so he could face a proper death with his health intact. You must have thought it fitting Vogel meant bird, and if he were truly repentant, he would have assuredly ascended to heaven. It was not uncommon for prisoners like Vogel to receive visitors, such as family members or the relatives of the victim seeking reconciliation. You knew deep down, forgiveness is divine, and you must have felt joyful when one condemned killer accepted some oranges and gingerbread from his victim's widow. You saw it as a sign that she had wholeheartedly forgiven him. You also might contemplate your role as someone who metes out justice in the name of society and above all God. It is your professional and sacred duty to serve as an agent who balances divine and earthly authority. The clergy would comfort the condemned. Most who visited condemned prisoners were the clergy. The chaplains who visited Vogel and other prisoners would most likely attempt to soften their hearts and convince them to beg for God's forgiveness. They would read from the Bible, pray, and preach while appealing to such diverse emotions as fear, sorrow, and hope. The prisoner was unlikely to see much art in his life. Smaller towns might have had a small church with only the most rudimentary paintings on its walls, if any. The prisoner could have possibly known about heaven and hell from prints. But they were too expensive for the lower classes to own, even with the advent of the printing press. Peasants relied on the clergy to show them their illustrated prayer books. Undoubtedly, the chaplains who visited Vogel would have brought their prized Bibles or their woodcuts, as well as etchings of saints, sinners, and death. The clerics used these pictures to illustrate their sermons. You watched as the chaplains led prisoners to recite the Lord's Prayer. They read from the Lutheran Catechism and offered reassuring words. Sometimes they joined along with the jailer or members of their family to sing hymns of consolation. Everyone wanted to believe Vogel would be ready for a penitent and open-hearted death. Death was like a performance. When you became an executioner, you knew it was not only about ridding the world of sinners. As with the teachings of the Church, there were still imperative lessons. Public executions had to fulfill two distinct objectives during your time. First of all, you wanted to shock spectators and use the harrowing scene as a preventive measure. The second goal was to buttress and reaffirm divine and temporal authority. As executioner, you played a pivotal role in achieving this delicate balance. You staged the events from condemnation through death procession to the actual execution, all as if it were a play. Indeed, the people of your era were familiar with morality plays. These were allegorical dramas where characters had personified moral qualities such as charity or vice or abstractions as death or youth, complete with a moral lesson. What greater stage performance to present these ideas publicly than by executing a sinner? As Harrington puts it, the good death Meister Franz Schmidt sought was essentially a drama of religious redemption, in which the poor sinner acknowledged and atoned for his or her crimes, voluntarily served as an admonitory example, and in return was granted a swift death and the promise of salvation. It was, in that sense, the last transaction a condemned prisoner would make in this world. You fulfilled your goal of addressing the divine and earthly realms on the state's behalf through this ritualized and regulated brutality. The last meal could be a feast or famine. It's common knowledge the condemned man can request whatever he wants for his last meal. The condemned could order whatever he or she wanted, and in copious amounts wine and beer included. Of course, imbibing large quantities of spirits at the hangman's meal were often to the advantage of the executioner. The prisoner was occasionally dead drunk and non-resistant before actually dying. In one instance, a rogue consumed so much food and drink his stomach had burst as he swung from the gallows. No doubt you also witnessed those prisoners who would not touch a bite. Once Vogel finishes his meal, your assistants clothe him in a white linen execution gown. Attired in his earthly shroud, he awaits you to preside over the public spectacle to come. The customary announcement from the warden is, "The executioner is at hand." Dressed in your ceremonial best, you enter and ask Vogel for forgiveness. You then share the traditional drink of peace with him. After a few words, you move on to the waiting judge and jury. The show must continue. Though he had already confessed to his crime, you present Vogel to the blood court, where his sentence will become known. You watch the red and black-robed judges in the ornately decorated room. You listen as the scribe reads the final confession and its tally of offenses, concluding with the formulaic condemnation which, being against the laws of the Holy Roman Empire, my lords have decreed and given sentence that he shall be condemned from life to death by the jurors paused to vote on the manner of execution. By rope, sword, fire, water, or the wheel. They decide on the sword. To present this living morality play to as many people as possible, broadsheets circulated weeks in advance. This assured hundreds and maybe thousands of onlookers. Vogel must walk a mile to reach his place of execution. His journey is trouble-free. This is not always the case, though. You lament when a prisoner behaves wildly or gives trouble. You sharply recall one unruly drunkard who urinated in the open at the gallows. When he learned his sentence, he said he was willing to die, but asked as a favor to fence and fight 4 of the guards. As you wrote in your journal, his request was refused. 3 strikes of the blade or the executioner is out, too. During your 45-year career and 187 recorded executions with a sword, you required a second stroke only 4 times. This is impressive, but you knew the consequences of a shoddy beheading all too well. In some German towns it was 3 strikes and you're out. That is, an executioner could have 3 strikes of the blade before the crowd grabbed them and forced them to die in place of the condemned prisoner. Crowds often comprised drunkards ready to riot at the drop a hat, especially when there wasn't the drop of a head. The riots could become violent. You dispatch Vogel with 1 clean swipe. In answer to the judge's satisfaction with your work, you reply, "For that I thank God and my master who has taught me such art." Finally, there is the routine activity of cleaning up. The performance is not over until you clean up the blood and dispose of the dead man. The mob lingers in morbid curiosity until you're done. After your retirement in 1617, you begin a new, lucrative career as a medical consultant. More accurately, you resume your other job. Harrington calculated the number of patients seeking medical advice amounted to roughly 15,000. You received a state funeral in 1634, in Nuremberg's most prominent cemetery. The graves of the well-known poet Hans Sachs and painter Albrecht Dürer are only a few steps away from your burial site. And you did it all without once wearing a hood. It wasn't easy to live as a medieval executioner, especially in the 16th century, when political unrest, growing Protestant reformations, and shifting views of crime and punishment collided in violent, transformative ways. However, that was the fate of men like you. Men who walked a fine line between being a social outcast and acting as an instrument of divine justice. Nuremberg, a proud city of tall Gothic towers and ever-bustling marketplaces, is illuminated by the sun this morning, August 13, 1577. However, unlike other artisans, you do not begin your day with prayer or breakfast. No, your morning starts with silence, a solemnness that creeps into your bones like the early morning fog, for you are Meister Franz Schmidt, executioner of the Holy Roman Empire, and today you must kill a man. His name is Hans Vogel, and you have grown oddly familiar with him over the past days of his incarceration. Vogel, convicted of burning another man alive in a stable out of revenge, is a doomed soul now dependent on your steel and mercy. It is strange, perhaps even divine irony, that the executioner and condemned often forge a quiet bond in these last days, something few outsiders could ever understand, something sacred and grim. You awoke early, long before the church bells rang out over St. Lorenz, washed yourself in cold water, combed your beard, and slipped into your robes with ritualistic precision. You inspected your sword, polished its gleaming surface with a steady hand, and whispered your usual prayer, not just to keep your aim true, but that the Lord would receive Vogel's soul without delay. After all, an executioner is not a mere butcher. You are a man of ceremony, of precise justice, a servant of both civic order and divine judgment, and the burden of your calling is never far from your heart. Though many outside your profession might imagine you as a hulking brute, hooded and bare-chested with muscles bursting from grim attire, your appearance is, in fact, methodical, dignified, even priestly in its somber way. The black coat you wear is not for theatrics, it is tradition. The gloves, the tall boots, the heavy belt from which hang keys, seals, and letters of sentence, all have purpose. You are not just the ender of life. You are a public official, sometimes a healer, sometimes a counselor, always a guardian of order. Some people in the town shun you as you enter the streets, mothers take their children away, and vendors become silent. You are feared, perhaps hated, but always obeyed. And still, despite this cold respect, some secretly envy your income, for few positions in the city are as stable and well compensated as yours. You do not live in squalor like many craftsmen. You have meat on your table, your children wear fine clothes, and your house is well kept. Yet this prosperity comes at a cost, for your soul walks a shadowed path few would dare tread. Most men inherit their father's trade. Smiths raise smiths, tailors raise tailors, but you, like your father before you, were cast into the role not by choice but by necessity. Heinrich Schmidt, your father, was forced into execution by decree of Albrecht II, threatened with death himself unless he executed 3 condemned thieves. The fate of your family was sealed that instant. When your father picked up the sword that day, he laid it upon your future as well. From that moment on, the taint of the executioner's blood was upon you, passed down not by preference but by tradition, like a curse and calling in equal measure. At 18, under your father's guidance, you took up the blade, and by the grace of God and grim determination, you became good, perhaps too good, at what you do. Since then, you have performed hundreds of executions and more than 300 lesser punishments. Floggings, brandings, amputations, and humiliating public displays. But execution, clean, final, surgical, is your specialty. You walk now toward the prison, through winding alleys still damp with dew. The air smells of bread and dung, of sweat and smoke, of city life as it awakens, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge that death stalks among them. The jailer greets you with a nod. Inside, the stone corridors echo with moans and mutters. Vogel is in the last cell, alone but not untouched by care. You've checked on him every day since his sentencing. His health is fair, his spirit anxious but resigned. You once thought, perhaps idealistically, that it would be better if condemned men were sick or feeble. Easier to detach, perhaps, but you've learned otherwise. Your role, paradoxically, includes keeping the condemned healthy enough to face death. You are part surgeon, part spiritual shepherd, for the dead must go cleanly and clearly into God's judgment. You have nursed men from fevers, stitched wounds, and soothed infections, just so they can meet your blade with dignity. Vogel has prayed often these past few days. You've heard his voice rise in trembling supplication, watched him clutch the cross offered by the prison chaplain. The clergy, as always, have done their part. The Lutheran priests visit him with fervent devotion, reading psalms, showing him woodcut prints of heaven and hell, etchings of angels and demons to stir his soul toward repentance. Most prisoners, especially commoners like Vogel, have never seen fine art. They know scripture not from books, but from songs and sermons. The priests wield images like swords, harrowing, moving, soul-scouring. You have seen men weep over the face of Christ engraved on thin parchment, beg for salvation as if the ink itself could wash them clean. You watch silently as the chaplain prays over Vogel again. A small crowd has gathered outside the prison, already anticipating the spectacle. Executions are, after all, the theater of morality in your time. There is no place for mercy, only redemption through suffering. Justice, both divine and imperial, must be seen to be believed. To remember the cost of sin, the public must witness the wicked fall. You know this well. Your work is theatrical as well as judicial. You are stage director, actor, and executioner all in one. Every step is a ritual, from the moment the sentence is read to the last swing of your blade. You carefully stage the procession, the prisoner in plain clothes with a rope around his wrists, the chaplain walking alongside him with a high cross, guards flanking him like spectral sentinels, and you behind him with a sword in your gloved hands. As the bells ring, the crowd, crammed into the square like cattle, murmurs and shifts. Some laugh while others cry. Children cling to their mothers. The execution platform rises in the center, a wooden scaffold blackened by blood and time. Has seen many deaths. You have mounted its steps countless times, always with steady feet. Today is no different. Vogel's face is pale, but he walks upright. The chaplain murmurs the Lord's Prayer. You wait, sword at your side, your face calm. You say nothing. This is Vogel's moment, not yours. The guard reads the sentence aloud. Arson, murder, unrepentant rage. But you know Vogel has repented. You saw it in his eyes, heard it in his voice. He has confessed his sins, begged God for mercy. That is enough. You nod once. He kneels, his eyes close. The chaplain places a hand on his shoulder and steps back. You draw your sword, feel the weight shift perfectly into your arms, and step forward. The square is enveloped in silence like a funeral veil. You raise the sword, whisper one final prayer. May the Lord receive you, Hans Vogel, and let the blade fall. The execution is clean. The head falls with a dull thud. Blood spurts. The body slumps. You step back. The guards move in. The chaplain begins a hymn. The crowd exhales, a collective breath released. A few cheers, others cross themselves. Children cry. The execution is over, but the performance continues. The head is displayed for a time. Justice must be visible. Only then can it teach. You clean your blade on a cloth soaked with vinegar, step down from the scaffold, and disappear into the crowd. Your work is done for now. But the day is not over. You must return to the prison, file your report in the city's ledgers, note the condition of the body, ensure the remains are buried outside consecrated ground unless the church intercedes. You wash again, scrubbing until your hands sting. You eat alone. No one dines with an executioner. Your wife knows to keep the children away after a killing. You sit in your study, rereading old cases, logging this one into your diary. August 13, 1577. Executed Hans Vogel by sword. Crime: murder by fire. Died penitent. Recommended prayer for soul. You light a candle. You pray for Vogel, not because you must, but because it is the only kindness left to give. You wonder if he felt peace in that final instant. You hope so. Evening falls. The city quiets. Somewhere a child cries, a dog barks, a bell tolls vespers. Life goes on. Tomorrow may bring another sentence, another soul. Or it may bring rest. You do not know. But tonight you are tired. Not from labor, but from the weight of judgment. You do not dream of blood or screaming. You dream of a river, calm and endless, with no scaffold in sight.